Veritas certification in North America. Today I'm joined by David Vigil, the Director of Business Development for the certification group. Today we'll be talking about the key changes of ISO 9001's revision in 2015. Before we do that, we'll go over quickly an overview of Bureau Veritas and Bureau Veritas certification for those of you not familiar. So Bureau Veritas, we've been around for over 200 years, and we are a global leader in testing, inspection, and certification services. Our network of over 1,000 offices and over 140 countries has allowed us to deliver services to a wide range of markets. Our 8 global businesses has serviced over 400 customers. And as you can see here on the right side of the screen, our global businesses range from consumer products to in-service inspections and verification, all the way to marine services and marine classification, which is in fact the first service offering of Bureau Veritas Group. So this graphic here shows not only the division of Bureau Veritas in terms of offices and employees, but also in terms of revenue. As you can see, we're pretty equally weighted around the world, and this really demonstrates how we are indeed a global business. So now that you understand who we are, let's talk about what we do. Bureau Veritas Group, whether you were in the certification, verification, or any other of our global businesses, what our profession is compliance. We take a reference standard, perform an action around that, and produce a deliverable. So whether the action be an audit, a verification, an inspection, or whether that deliverable be a certification, a letter of conformity, or a verification service. Bureau Veritas certification is indeed the global leader in management system verification and certification services. Our global network of 5,700 highly trained and experienced auditors has allowed us to service over 80,000 companies worldwide and deliver over 100,000 certificates in over 100 countries. We perform a wide range of certification and auditing services, and we're recognized by the leading organizations worldwide. So from here, I will hand it over to David Vigil, who will be the main presenter in our presentation today.
Okay, thank you, Lucas, for that introduction. Like Lucas said, I am the Director of Business Development for Bureau Veritas Certification in North America. And today I do want to cover some of the key changes to the ISO 9001 standard for the 2015 revision. There have been a lot of questions about what are these changes, so I'm going to try to just give a brief on some of the main changes. And you can see on the graphic here, this is an overview of these changes, and you may already be noticing that the changes are rather significant when it comes to ISO 9001. There are new terms that haven't really shown up in the past, such as risk-based thinking. HLS structure has always been there, but we'll talk about that. And then the change from management commitment to leadership commitment, and also what it means for the stakeholders. So first off, we're going to talk about high-level structure. HLS, if you see in the next slides, HLS, we're referring to the high-level structure. So before we talk about the high-level structure, HLS, let's talk about where does this high-level structure come from? What is it? So high-level structure. You're probably familiar with high-level structure because every standard has a different numbering system, and the clauses are numbered to help coordinate and help organize a standard. But every management system standard has its own unique numbering system. While they may have clauses that exactly mirror each other, such as customer service, scope, planning, operations, they may show up in different parts of the standard. So with this new high-level structure, it's been adopted basically to help align the standards. Now, there are very many different standards. There's a quality management system standard, environmental management system standard, food safety. And then there are sector-specific standards, some for the oil and gas, medical, aerospace. And it's been a challenge for organizations in the past when you try to integrate management systems and get certified against different standards, because you're trying to map all of the core elements and the base requirements that are the same through the different standards. You're trying to map them to each other. Well, with the new HLS being aligned, it's going to make life easier for the organizations implementing the management system standard, but also for the organizations such as ourselves auditing against these standards. And even though the high HLS has changed, that hasn't changed one thing. The Plan, Do, Check, Act, the Deming model is still alive and well in the new HLS. So there have been some people questioning whether that's still part of the new revision of the standard because the adoption of the risk approach. But as you can see here in this outline of the elements of the standard, you can see how Plan, Do, Check, Act model still fits in with the new version of the standard. So the next thing we want to talk about is the other thing that we get a lot of questions about in regards to changes to the standard, which is risk-based thinking. So risk-based thinking is introduced into the ISO 9001 standard. It's introduced explicitly or implicitly. So it may not be directly referenced, but it does appear in every element of the new standard. So why was risk-based thinking put in, and what is it? So ISO recognized that, yes, successful organizations take into account risk. I mean, that's just a fact. If you're not addressing risk in everything that you do, then likely you're not going to be a successful organization. So in order to reflect more accurately organizations, it was just taken into account that this is something that's already happening. So if we are going to create a successful management system standard, we have to account for something that organizations are already doing and account for risk. So the main objectives is to provide confidence to the organization, right? Because organizations, whether it's a simple process or customer satisfaction or design, they want to make sure that risk is addressed. They don't want risk to have a negative impact, and they don't want to not know that there's a risk. So if we're really taking a process approach to auditing, then we should be able to see that that risk is addressed in everything that the organization does, even from the simplest process to the most complex process. So why adopt risk-based thinking? Top management understands that no matter what the process is, there is a risk associated with it. So if we start implementing that into the standard and just assuming that, yes, no matter what we do, risk is part of life, we're going to establish a culture and an organizational culture that says, look, let's take it into account, but if we take it into account and address it, it's going to make our organization more successful than sweeping it under the rug and pretending that there is no risk with any process, or some processes have no risk. Every process has risk, whether it be very minimal to very high, but if we're addressing it at every level, it's only going to help the organization become more successful. So what do you need to do to address risk? You have to take it into account. You have to do a risk analysis. Do you have to make a plan for risk? Do you have to analyze every process? These are questions that we go into in our training courses that talk about risk assessment. So what options do I have to address risk? So there are 4 basic things that we're going to be looking for in organizations to see how they address the risk in each process. And these 4 things are pretty simple. They're 4 things that most of us do in everyday life when it comes to risk. We're either going to mitigate risk, which means that we're going to take some sort of action to reduce it and put some safety measures to make sure that whatever the risk is minimized. We're going to avoid risk. That means we're just going to not do that activity. Maybe we don't do that process. Or we can transfer the risk. So whether it's outsourcing or whether it's something else, we're going to transfer that risk to somewhere else because we can't accept the risk, but we can accept transferring that risk to someone else. Or we can accept the risk. And what that means is that we say, look, we agree that there is a risk associated with that process, but we can live with that. And so we'll continue to do that process, accepting that level of risk. And so those are the two main things that we get a lot of questions about, but there are other key changes to the standard, and we're going to go over some of those right now. So the reduction of prescriptive requirements. And this is one that is a good example here, because a lot of organizations that we audited in the past, they would do, for example, calibration, right? So they did calibration at an arbitrary level just to tick the box that said, yes, the standard says that we must do calibration, and we do calibration. But was it appropriate level of calibration? Did it really have any impact on the organization? You know, maybe not. But in the new standard, that's addressed, and we want to make sure that if you do have a process for calibration or something else, that the level of calibration is appropriate for the activity that you're trying to address. So in other words, it's not just an arbitrary number, but has some meaning specific to the organization. Documented information. This is one that we get every now and then because there's no more mention of a quality manual in the new standard. And while it is somewhat of a change, the organizations that we audit today, a large number of them already, a quality manual doesn't exist. More and more technology is driving organizations to put all of their process and documents and control documents online. It's accessible for all the employees, it's easier to control, and it really does constitute a manual, but yet they're just a collection of processes. So with that being said, this is an example of how the new standard is really addressing technological changes in the world. And then two other clauses. Really, I feel like these are mainly driven by the fact that ISO historically has been a standard mostly written for manufacturing organizations, and we have seen in recent years a big shift. Service organizations are looking at this standard as a way to differentiate themselves, as a way to improve their organizations. And so these two new clauses, I feel like really have an impact to make the standard more appropriate for service organizations. So you have to understand the organization. So in its context, what does the organization do? So does it have external clients or internal clients? 4.2 gets more to that, understanding the needs and expectations of the interested parties. So a client may not be a person that purchases your product, but it may be an internal client. It may be your parent organization that you're providing a service to, but we need to understand what are the expectations of that organization. And then finally, exclusions. So there is no text that says, hey, this is how you do an exclusion, but I can tell you that exclusions will definitely still play a role in management system certification. So if an organization is not doing design and development, absolutely there will be an allowance to exclude that, even though it's not specifically defined. And then finally, one of the main changes, leadership. So in the past you said, hey, we have a management system representative available for the audit, so that demonstrates our commitment, management commitment to our management system. But now they've changed that to say leadership commitment, right? Because we don't want just an arbitrary management system representative there. We really want to see how leadership is committed to the management system. Is that involvement with the writing of quality policies, setting objectives, integrating the quality management system into everyday business processes? It's beyond just attending meetings and just being part of the audit, but really having some sort of demonstration that they're taking a leadership role and that they're demonstrating to the organization that they're committed to this project. You know, the quality management system should be something that's driving the organization to continually improve, but without the push from leadership and the buy-in from leadership, then that it's going to be hard to be successful at that. Okay, so these are quite a few changes, and these aren't even all the changes. So luckily, Bureau Veritas has put together a website dedicated specifically to changes and revisions to the standards for ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. And now I'll hand it back over to Lucas so he can talk about this website.
Well, thank you very much, David, for that presentation. And David's absolutely right. Bureau Veritas has developed a dedicated website at revision2015.com to serve as both an encyclopedia of information around this revision, as well as a portal for all of Bureau Veritas's commercial services for the transition. At revision2015.com, you'll be able to find multimedia content such as video interviews, webinars. You'll be able to see survey results that we've carried out. You'll have access to our brochures and frequently asked questions, transition milestones. You'll also have access to all the frequently asked questions in all ranges for both of these standards. You'll also be able to access information on all of the commercial services, such as training and other related services. And with that, we'd like to thank you again today for joining us. We hope that it has been informative for you, and we look forward to speaking with you and helping you along your transition in the coming weeks, months, and years. Thank you again very much.